The blood trail started at the edge of the property and led straight to his porch, where the woman collapsed just as the sun dipped below the horizon on that sweltering August evening in 1882. James Lawton had been mending a broken saddle in his barn when he heard the thud, a sound that made his gut clench with immediate worry. He dropped everything and ran, his boots kicking up dust as he crossed the yard of his modest ranch outside Newton, Kansas. What he found made his heart nearly stop. A young woman lay crumpled against his wooden porch steps, her dark hair matted with sweat and dirt, her cotton dress torn and soaked with blood along her left side. Her face was pale as milk, lips slightly parted, and she was completely unconscious. James dropped to his knees beside her, his weathered hands hovering over her body as he tried to assess the damage without causing more harm. He was no doctor, but he had seen enough injuries during his years as a ranch hand, an occasional scout, to know this was serious. The blood was still flowing from what looked like a deep gash in her side, probably from a knife or possibly a bullet graze. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck and felt a pulse, weak but steady. She was alive, but she would not be for long if he did not act fast. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body limp and unresponsive. He carried her through the front door, using his shoulder to push it open, and laid her gently on his kitchen table. The wooden surface was clean, thankfully, as he had just scrubbed it down that morning. He grabbed every lamp he owned and set them around the table, flooding the space with as much light as possible. The night was going to be long, and he needed to see what he was doing. James worked quickly, his hands steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. He grabbed a pair of scissors from his sewing kit and carefully cut away the fabric around the wound. The injury was about 6 inches long, a deep laceration that ran along her ribcage. It looked like someone had come at her with a blade, and she had tried to dodge but not quite fast enough. The edges of the wound were jagged and dirty, filled with bits of fabric and what looked like trail dust. He pumped water into a basin and set it to boil on his stove, then grabbed the bottle of whiskey he kept for medicinal purposes. His hands moved with practiced efficiency as he gathered clean cloths, needle and thread, and everything else he might need. While the water heated, he poured whiskey over his hands and the cloths, sterilizing them as best he could. He had learned this trick from an army medic years ago, and it had saved more than one life. The woman stirred slightly as he began cleaning the wound, a soft moan escaping her lips. Her eyelids fluttered but did not open. James worked as gently as he could, but he knew it had to hurt. He cleaned away the blood and debris, revealing the full extent of the damage. The cut was deep, but had somehow missed anything vital. She was lucky, incredibly lucky, but she had lost a lot of blood. Once the wound was clean, James threaded his needle with steady hands. He had stitched up horses, cattle, and even himself on one memorable occasion, but this felt different. This was a woman, young and vulnerable, and she was depending on him completely. He took a deep breath and began the delicate work of closing the wound. Each stitch had to be precise, close enough to hold but not so tight that it would tear the flesh. He worked by the flickering lamplight, sweat dripping down his forehead despite the evening air cooling the house. It took him nearly an hour to finish the stitching. By the time he tied off the final thread, his back ached and his eyes burned from the strain. But the wound was closed, neat rows of black thread holding the edges together. He cleaned it one more time with whiskey, then wrapped it with clean bandages, tying them securely but not too tightly around her torso. Only then did James allow himself to really look at her face. She was beautiful in a way that caught him off guard. Even pale and unconscious, there was something striking about her features. High cheekbones, a straight nose, full lips that were now regaining a bit of color. Her dark hair was tangled and filthy, but he could see it would be lovely when clean. He found himself wondering who she was, where she had come from, and what had happened to put her on his porch half dead. He could not leave her on the kitchen table all night. As carefully as he had carried her in, he lifted her again and took her to his bedroom. It was the only proper bed in the house, and she needed rest more than he did. He could sleep in the chair or on the floor if necessary. He laid her on top of the quilt his mother had made him before she passed, then covered her with a lighter blanket. Her breathing was shallow but regular, and the bleeding had stopped. Now all he could do was wait and hope she would wake up. James pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down heavily. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving him exhausted and worried. He had done everything he could think of, but what if it was not enough? What if she had internal injuries he could not see? What if infection set in? He pushed the dark thoughts away and focused on the steady rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing. She was alive. That was what mattered. The night stretched on endlessly. James dozed in the chair, jerking awake every time she moved or made a sound. He checked her bandages twice, relieved each time to find no fresh blood. He dampened a cloth with cool water and wiped her forehead, trying to keep her comfortable. As the hours crawled by, he found himself talking to her, even though she could not hear him. "You are going to be all right," he said softly. "I do not know what happened to you, but you are safe now. Nobody is going to hurt you here." His voice was rough from disuse. He lived alone and often went days without speaking to another soul. But somehow, talking to her made him feel less helpless. "My name is James, James Lawton. This is my ranch about 5 miles outside Newton. You are in Kansas if you did not know. You are safe here." As dawn began to break, painting the sky outside his window in shades of pink and gold, the woman's eyes finally opened. They were green, he noticed immediately, a deep forest green that seemed to look right through him. She blinked slowly, confusion clear on her face as she tried to focus. "Easy," James said gently, leaning forward. "Do not try to move too quickly. You are hurt." Her lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Her throat must have been parched. James quickly poured water from the pitcher on his nightstand and held the cup to her lips. She drank gratefully, some of the color returning to her cheeks. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak. "My ranch outside Newton," James replied. "You collapsed on my porch last night. You were bleeding badly. I stitched you up as best I could." Her hand moved to her side, feeling the bandages under the blanket. Her eyes widened as memory seemed to flood back. "They attacked the wagon," she said, her voice breaking. "Outlaws. They killed the driver and shot the horses. I just ran. You are safe now," James assured her. "Nobody followed you here. I would have heard them." Tears welled up in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." James felt something shift in his chest, a warmth he had not experienced in years. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Penelope," she said. "Penelope Brooks. I was traveling to Newton to meet my aunt. She runs a boarding house there. My parents died last year and I had nowhere else to go." "I am sorry about your parents," James said sincerely, "and I am sorry about what happened to you. But you are safe now and you are going to heal. You can stay here as long as you need to." Penelope looked at him with those striking green eyes, and something passed between them, a connection neither could quite explain. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." James considered the question. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "Because you needed help and I could give it. That is reason enough." She smiled weakly, and even that small expression transformed her face. "You are a good man, James Lawton." He felt his ears grow warm at the compliment. "Rest now," he said, standing up. You need to regain your strength. I will make some broth. You need to eat something." Over the next few days, James tended to Penelope with a care that surprised even himself. He changed her bandages twice daily, keeping the wound clean and watching for any signs of infection. He made her simple meals, starting with broth and gradually adding more substantial food as her strength returned. He helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back so she could eat and drink more easily. Penelope proved to be a resilient patient. Despite the pain, she never complained. Instead, she talked to James, telling him about her life before the attack. She had grown up in Missouri, the only child of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. When influenza took both her parents within a week of each other, she had sold their small house and used the money to make the journey west to her mother's sister, the only family she had left. "I should have waited for a more secure convoy," she said one afternoon as James helped her take a few steps around the room. Her arm was draped over his shoulders, and he supported most of her weight. "But I was so eager to start my new life. I thought I could not wait another week." "You could not have known what would happen," James said. "Do not blame yourself for someone else's evil." As Penelope grew stronger, she began to ask James about his own life. He found himself opening up in ways he never had before, not even to the few friends he had in town. He told her about growing up on a farm in Kentucky, about losing his father to a farming accident when he was just 15. He told her about heading west at 18 to make his own way, working as a ranch hand, a scout, even a deputy for a brief period before settling on this piece of land 3 years ago. "It is not much," he admitted, gesturing to the simple house, "but it is mine. I have 20 head of cattle, a few horses, and enough land to grow some crops. It is a modest living, but it is honest work." "It is wonderful," Penelope said, looking around the tidy bedroom with genuine appreciation. "You have built something real here. You should be proud." James felt that warmth in his chest again. He was starting to realize that he looked forward to talking with Penelope, to seeing her smile when he brought her meals, to the way her eyes lit up when she was feeling well enough to laugh at one of his stories. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to have someone to share his days with. By the end of the first week, Penelope was able to walk on her own, though she still tired easily. James moved her to the rocking chair by the window so she could look out at the ranch while he worked. She watched him tend to the animals, repair fences, and handle the dozens of small tasks that kept the place running. She began to insist on helping with small things, mending his worn shirts and organizing his chaotic kitchen. "You do not have to do that," James protested one afternoon, finding her carefully folding his laundered clothes despite his instructions to rest. "I want to," Penelope said firmly. "You have done so much for me. Let me do this small thing in return." James realized there was no point in arguing with her. Besides, he secretly enjoyed seeing her touches around his home. The curtains she had washed and rehung, the wildflowers she had asked him to pick and placed in a jar on the table, the way she had rearranged his pantry so it actually made sense. The house felt more like a home than it had in years. As the second week began, James knew he needed to take Penelope into town to meet her aunt. She was healing well, and her family must be frantic with worry. But he found himself reluctant to suggest it, not wanting to break the comfortable routine they had fallen into. Finally, on a Tuesday morning, he broached the subject. "Your aunt must be worried about you," he said over breakfast. "I should take you into Newton. Let her know you are alive and safe." Penelope's face fell slightly, though she tried to hide it. "Yes, of course. You are right. I have been imposing on you for too long already." "It has not been an imposition," James said quickly, more quickly than he intended. "I have enjoyed having you here. The company, I mean. It has been nice." Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. James felt his heart beat faster. He had been trying to ignore the growing feelings he had for this woman, telling himself it was just the circumstances, that once she left his life would return to normal and he would forget about her. But looking at her now, seeing the warmth in her green eyes, he knew he was fooling himself. "I have enjoyed it too," Penelope said softly. "More than I can say. You have been so kind, so patient. I do not want to leave, but I know I must. My aunt is expecting me." James nodded, trying to swallow past the lump in his throat. "I will hitch up the wagon. We can go this afternoon if you are feeling up to it." The ride into Newton was quiet. Penelope sat beside James on the wagon seat, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. The August heat was still intense, but a breeze kept it bearable. James found himself hyper-aware of every detail: the way Penelope's hair blew in the wind, the smell of the soap she had used that morning, the soft sound of her breathing. Newton was a growing town, bustling with activity as they rolled down Main Street. Penelope directed him to a 2-story house at the edge of town, freshly painted with a sign out front that read, "Brooks Boarding House." Before James could even set the brake, a woman came rushing out of the front door, her face a mixture of relief and anguish. "Penelope," she cried, rushing to the wagon. "Oh, my dear girl, we thought you were dead." "When the wagon never arrived and they found it burned with bodies, we were sure you had been killed." James helped Penelope down carefully, mindful of her still healing injury. Her aunt embraced her tightly, tears streaming down her face. Penelope was crying too, and James felt like an intruder on their reunion. He started to step back to give them privacy, but Penelope caught his hand. "Aunt Margaret, this is James Lawton," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He saved my life. I would have died if he had not found me." Margaret turned to James with tear-filled eyes and grasped both his hands. "Thank you," she said fervently. "Thank you for bringing her back to me. I can never repay you for what you have done." "No repayment is necessary, madam," James said, uncomfortable with the praise. "I did what anyone would have done." "Not anyone," Margaret said firmly. "You are a good man, Mr. Lawton. Please come inside. Let me at least offer you a meal and a cup of coffee." James wanted to refuse, to make a quick exit and let Penelope settle in with her family. But Penelope was still holding his hand, looking at him with those green eyes, silently pleading with him to stay. So he agreed, tying his horses to the post and following the 2 women inside. The boarding house was comfortable and clean, with a large dining room where several boarders were finishing their lunch. Margaret shooed them away and insisted James and Penelope sit, while she brought out coffee and fresh bread with butter. As they sat at the table, Margaret fussed over Penelope, examining her bandages and asking dozens of questions about what had happened. James found himself explaining the night he found her, the hours he spent stitching her wound, the careful recovery process. Margaret listened with rapt attention, periodically dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "You must let me pay you for your trouble," Margaret insisted. "For the medical supplies, the food, your time." "I will not take money for helping someone in need," James said firmly. "Please, madam, I would not feel right about it." Margaret seemed to understand she would not win that argument. Instead, she turned her attention to her niece. "You will stay here with me, of course. I have a lovely room all prepared for you. You can help me run the boarding house once you are fully healed. It will be good to have family here." Penelope smiled and nodded, but James noticed the smile did not quite reach her eyes. She looked tired suddenly, and he realized the trip had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. "I should go," James said, standing up. "Let you rest and get settled." "Will you come back?" Penelope asked suddenly, her eyes searching his face. "To visit, I mean. I would like to know how the ranch is doing, how you are doing." James felt hope bloom in his chest. "If you would like me to, I would be happy to visit." "I would like that very much," Penelope said, and the warmth in her voice made his heart soar. James left the boarding house walking on air, despite the ache in his chest at leaving her behind. He told himself it was for the best. She needed to be with family, to heal properly, to start her new life. But as he drove the wagon back to his lonely ranch, the house seemed emptier than it ever had before. The next week crawled by. James threw himself into his work, trying to keep his mind off Penelope. But everything reminded him of her. The rocking chair by the window where she had sat. The jar that had held her wildflowers, now empty. The shirts she had mended, hanging neatly in his wardrobe. He had known her for such a short time, but she had left an indelible mark on his life. On Saturday, he could stand it no longer. He bathed, shaved, and put on his best shirt. He rode into Newton with his heart pounding, terrified she would not want to see him, that he had imagined the connection between them. When he knocked on the door of the boarding house, Margaret answered with a knowing smile. "She has been watching the street for you all week," Margaret said quietly. "She is in the garden. Go on through." James found Penelope sitting on a bench under a large oak tree, a book open in her lap. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her face transformed with joy. "James," she said, standing up too quickly and wincing slightly. "You came." "I said I would," James replied, suddenly shy. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," Penelope said. "The wound is healing nicely. No infection, thanks to your excellent doctoring." She gestured to the bench. "Will you sit with me?" They sat together in the dappled shade, and the awkwardness melted away as they began to talk. Penelope told him about settling into the boarding house, meeting the various boarders, and learning her aunt's routines. James told her about his week on the ranch, making her laugh with a story about a particularly stubborn cow. As they talked, James realized he had never felt more comfortable with another person. Penelope was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in what he had to say, quick to laugh and just as quick to offer thoughtful opinions of her own. The afternoon flew by, and before James knew it, the sun was setting. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "It is a long ride back." "Will you come again?" Penelope asked, and there was no mistaking the hope in her voice. "If you want me to, I will come every week," James said boldly. "I want you to," Penelope said, her cheeks flushing pink. "Very much." That began a pattern that lasted through the rest of August and into September. Every Saturday, James would ride into town to spend the afternoon with Penelope. Sometimes they walked through Newton, and she showed him the shops and streets she was learning. Sometimes they sat in the garden and talked for hours. As the weeks passed, James felt himself falling deeper and deeper in love with her, though he was terrified to say the words. One Saturday in late September, Penelope had a surprise for him. "Aunt Margaret has given me the afternoon off," she said with a mischievous smile. "Would you take me out to your ranch? I would love to see it again." James agreed eagerly, helping her into his wagon for the ride out. The day was perfect, cooler than it had been in months, with a crystal blue sky overhead. As they rode, Penelope moved closer on the bench until her side was pressed against his. James put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him with a contented sigh. When they reached the ranch, James gave her a proper tour, showing her the barn, the cattle, the vegetable garden he had planted. Penelope was genuinely interested in everything, asking questions and offering suggestions. When they reached the house, James made coffee and they sat at his kitchen table, just as they had during her recovery. "I have missed this place," Penelope said softly, looking around. "It feels like home." "I have missed having you here," James admitted. "The house has been too quiet without you." Penelope reached across the table and took his hand. "James, I need to tell you something." His heart started pounding. "What is it?" "These past weeks, seeing you every Saturday, it has been the highlight of my life," she said, her green eyes locked on his. "I think about you constantly. I dream about you. I find myself wishing I was here with you instead of in town. I know it is too soon. I know we have not known each other long, but I cannot help how I feel." James stood up and moved around the table, pulling her gently to her feet. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you," Penelope whispered. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night when you worked so hard to save my life. I love your kindness, your strength, your gentle heart. I love everything about you." James cupped her face in his hands, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "I love you too," he said. "I have been so scared to say it, afraid you did not feel the same way. But Penelope, I love you more than I have ever loved anyone. These weeks without you here have been torture." He kissed her then, a soft, tender kiss that spoke of all the longing and love he had been holding back. Penelope kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, and James felt like his heart might burst with happiness. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless and smiling. "What do we do now?" Penelope asked. "Marry me," James said impulsively. "I know it is fast, but I do not want to waste another day without you. Marry me, Penelope. Come live here with me. Help me build this ranch into something great. Let me love you for the rest of our lives." Tears spilled down Penelope's cheeks, but she was smiling wider than James had ever seen. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you. There is nothing I want more." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Newton church. Margaret cried through the entire service, happy to see her niece so radiantly happy. A few of James's friends from town attended, along with some of the boarding house residents who had grown fond of Penelope. It was not a grand affair, but it was perfect. Their wedding night, back at the ranch that was now their shared home, was tender and passionate. James treated Penelope like the precious gift she was, taking his time, making sure she felt loved and cherished. Penelope responded with equal passion, and they came together in a way that felt both entirely new and completely natural. The next morning, James woke to find Penelope already up, standing at the window in her nightgown, looking out at the ranch bathed in morning light. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, careful to avoid the scar on her side that was now just a thin white line. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, kissing her temple. "How lucky I am," Penelope said, leaning back against him. "How strange life is. If I had not been attacked, if I had not stumbled onto your porch, I never would have met you. Something so terrible led to something so wonderful." "I was thinking the same thing," James admitted. "I am grateful every day that I was home that night, that I could help you. You have changed my life in every possible way." Penelope turned in his arms and kissed him deeply. "We are going to be so happy together," she said with certainty. "I can feel it." She was right. The first year of their marriage was full of hard work and simple joys. Together they expanded the ranch, adding more cattle and building a proper chicken coop. Penelope started a large garden, growing vegetables they sold in town for extra income. She also took in sewing work, her skilled hands creating beautiful garments that became sought after in Newton and beyond. But more than the material success, they found a deep and abiding happiness in each other. James loved coming in from a long day of work to find Penelope humming as she cooked dinner. He loved the sound of her laughter, the way she challenged him to think differently about things, the warmth of her body beside his every night. Penelope loved the quiet strength of her husband, his gentle humor, the way he looked at her as if she was the most precious thing in the world. They talked about everything and nothing, shared dreams and fears, built a life together that was rooted in love and mutual respect. When disagreements arose, as they inevitably did, they talked through them calmly, always remembering what truly mattered. Their love only deepened as the months passed. In the spring of 1884, Penelope discovered she was pregnant. James was overjoyed, though also nervous about becoming a father. Penelope was radiant throughout her pregnancy, blooming with happiness. Margaret visited often, fussing over her niece and helping prepare for the baby. On a crisp October morning, Penelope gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after James's father. James held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, overwhelmed by love for this tiny person and the woman who had given him life. "You did so well," he told Penelope, kissing her sweaty forehead as she rested after the delivery. "He is perfect. You are perfect." "I love you so much." "I love you too," Penelope said tiredly, smiling up at him. "We made this beautiful boy together. We are a family now." Being parents transformed them in wonderful ways. James discovered he had infinite patience for his son, spending hours teaching him about the animals and the land as he grew. Penelope was a natural mother, nurturing and loving while also teaching Thomas to be independent and strong. They raised him with the values that had brought them together: kindness, hard work, honesty, and love. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Catherine. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair, and she wrapped both her parents around her tiny finger from day one. Thomas was a devoted big brother, always wanting to help care for his baby sister. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint efforts. By 1887, they had expanded significantly, hiring on help during the busy seasons. James had become known throughout the county as a fair and honest rancher. While Penelope's sewing business had grown so much, she had hired 2 women from town to help her keep up with orders. But despite their success and busy lives, they always made time for each other. Every Sunday, after church and family dinner, they would take a walk together around the property, just the 2 of them, holding hands and talking about their week. It was a sacred tradition, a way to stay connected amidst the beautiful chaos of family life. One Sunday evening in late summer, as they walked and watched the sun set over their land, Penelope stopped and turned to face James. They were near the spot where he had first found her, all those years ago. The porch had been expanded and improved, but it was still the same house. "Do you ever think about that night?" Penelope asked, though she knew the answer. "All the time," James said, pulling her close. "It was the night my life truly began. I had no idea when I heard that thud on my porch that I was about to meet the love of my life." "I was so scared," Penelope admitted. "I thought I was going to die. But even in my fear, when I saw your face looking down at me with such concern, I felt safe. I knew somehow that everything would be all right." James kissed her softly. "You are my everything, Penelope, you and our children. This life we have built together. I thank God every day that you stumbled onto my property." "I love you, James Lawton," Penelope said, her eyes shining with emotion, "more than words can ever express." "I love you too, Penelope Lawton," James replied, "always and forever." As the years continued to pass, their love only grew stronger. They weathered hard times together, including a brutal drought in 1889 that nearly broke them financially, and the death of Aunt Margaret in 1891, which devastated Penelope. But through every challenge, they had each other, and that made all the difference. They celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary in 1892 with a renewal of their vows, their children standing up with them as witnesses. Thomas was nearly 8, Catherine 6, and they had welcomed another son, David, 2 years earlier. The little church in Newton was packed with friends and neighbors who had come to honor the couple known for their deep love and devotion to each other. 10 years ago, you saved my life, Penelope said during the ceremony, tears streaming down her face as she held both of James's hands. But you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live. You gave me love, family, purpose, and joy beyond measure. I promise to love you with all my heart for the next 10 years and every year after that, until my last breath. James could barely speak through his own tears. You walked into my life bleeding and broken, and you healed something in me I did not even know was wounded. You filled my empty house with love and laughter. You gave me children and a purpose beyond just surviving. You are my best friend, my partner, my true love. I promise to cherish you and our family for all the days of my life. Their children grew healthy and strong, each with their own unique personality, but all sharing their parents' values of kindness and hard work. Thomas developed his father's way with animals and love of the land. Catherine inherited her mother's artistic talents and her father's business sense. David was the family comedian, always finding ways to make everyone laugh. The ranch became one of the most successful in the county. But James and Penelope never forgot their humble beginnings. They were known for their generosity, often helping neighbors in need and donating to the church and school. They believed in giving back to the community that had supported them. As their children grew older and started families of their own, James and Penelope found themselves entering a new chapter of their lives. They were grandparents now, delighting in the little ones who came to visit the ranch. But they were still deeply in love, still took their Sunday walks, still held hands across the dinner table. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1902, their grown children threw them a grand party at the ranch. The house and barn were decorated with lanterns and flowers. Friends and family came from all over Kansas to celebrate. As the sun set and couples began dancing to the music from a hired band, James led Penelope out onto the makeshift dance floor. 20 years, Penelope marveled as they swayed to the music. How did it go by so fast? Because we were too busy being happy to notice time passing, James said, looking down at his wife with the same love he had felt on their wedding day. Her dark hair was threaded with silver now, fine lines creased the corners of her eyes, but to him she was as beautiful as the day he first saw her wake up in his bed. I would do it all again, Penelope said. Every moment, every challenge, every joy, as long as you were beside me. I will always be beside you, James promised, for the rest of our lives and whatever comes after. They danced together as their children and grandchildren looked on, a testament to the power of love that had started with a desperate woman collapsing on a lonely cowboy's porch. That night of blood and fear had transformed into a lifetime of love and joy. It was a story they told their grandchildren often, about how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best things. As the years continued to unfold, James and Penelope grew old together gracefully. They faced the new century with hope and wonder, marveling at how much the world had changed since that August night in 1882. But some things never changed. The way James still brought Penelope wildflowers, the way she still mended his shirts with careful stitches, the way they still found excuses to touch each other as they moved through their daily routines. In 1910, on a warm spring evening, they sat together on their front porch, the same porch where their story had begun. They were in their 60s now, their children grown with families of their own, their ranch being run mostly by Thomas and his sons. But they were still together, still holding hands, still in love. "You have any regrets?" Penelope asked, a question she had never posed before. James thought about it seriously, then shook his head. "Not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you and this life. How could I regret any of it?" "I was thinking the same thing," Penelope said, resting her head on his shoulder. "If I could go back and change that day, prevent the attack, I would not, because it brought me here, to you, to this beautiful life we built together." "We were meant to find each other," James said with certainty. "I believe that with all my heart. Whether it was fate or God's plan or just incredible luck, we were meant to be together." Penelope lifted her head and kissed him, a kiss that still held passion after all these years. "I love you, James Lawton, now and always. I love you, Penelope Lawton, forever." They sat together as the sun set over their land, over the life they had built together through hard work, dedication, and most of all, love. The blood that had once stained this porch had long ago washed away, replaced by decades of happiness and the sound of children's laughter. What had started as a desperate fight for survival had become the greatest love story either of them could have imagined. Their story was told and retold in Newton for generations, becoming the stuff of local legend. The cowboy who saved a dying woman and fell in love with her, the couple who built a ranching empire on nothing but hard work and devotion to each other. But to James and Penelope, it was simply their life, the precious gift they had been given and had chosen to nurture every single day. They lived well into their 80s, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who all grew up knowing the story of how their family began. When James passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925, Penelope was holding his hand. She followed him just 6 months later, unable to imagine life without her beloved partner. They were buried together in the Newton Cemetery under a shared headstone that read simply, "James and Penelope Lawton. A love that conquered all, together forever." Their children made sure their story was preserved, written down for future generations, a testament to what can happen when two souls find each other against all odds. The ranch remained in the family for decades, a thriving legacy of the love between a cowboy and the woman who had collapsed on his porch one August evening. Every generation that lived there knew they were walking on sacred ground, where one of the greatest love stories ever told had begun with a single act of compassion and blossomed into something that transcended time itself. And if you visit Newton, Kansas today and ask the old-timers about the Lawton Ranch, some of them will still tell you the story. About the night in 1882, when Penelope Brooks stumbled onto James Lawton's property, bleeding and near death. About how he worked through the night to save her life. About how that terrible night became the beginning of a love that lasted over 40 years and created a legacy that lived on long after they were gone. It was a story of survival, of second chances, of love finding a way even in the darkest circumstances. It was a reminder that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are actually doorways to the best things we will ever know. And it was proof that true love, the kind that sees us through every trial and celebrates every joy, is worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth cherishing every single day we are blessed to have it.